Hello. Thanks for tuning in today, guys, for the Abley webinar. I'm going to be talking about our locations of interest web map that we've created, showing mapping data in near real time. And I say near real time, it's not exact, but every 5 minutes, new data gets added if it's available. So the site I'm talking about today is locations.abley.com, and it is showing the locations of interest for the COVID-19 locations of interest that are released by the Ministry of Health. So all that information is a direct replica of what is on the Ministry of Health website. We don't add anything, take anything away. It's exactly the same as what the Ministry of Health has. So if they take away a record, we take away a record. And the initial release was created in 1 day. So it was very much a case of getting it out quickly to get people using it. And that is kind of what happened. So 1 day. And it updates every 5 minutes. So just a scheduled process runs every 5 minutes to update that data and check the data. And one of our kind of points of difference is that we display all the locations and all the bus and train routes as they come through. So basically, I believe we're probably the only website that does the bus and trains as well. And you can filter by data and time. So if you're interested in a specific place at a certain time, you can choose that. And so far, we've had about 90,000 views, which is kind of surprising. And it was a pretty relatively easy website to make. So getting those amount of views has been quite useful. And of course, hopefully, it's made a difference. So even if it's helped 1 or 2 people realise that they've been at a location of interest, then that's a great benefit. And just the update process of keeping it up to date is, relatively easy. There's the occasional things that come through that just don't map properly, where we've got to go and do some manual alterations, but in the scheme of things, they're pretty small. So what's the background to this application? Well, on the 17th of August 2021, as you'll be well aware, we went into lockdown for a case that had appeared in Coromandel and was back in Auckland. And what that case was it was likely to be the Delta strain, and so things got heated very quickly. So the Ministry of Health did contact tracing and were able to find another number of places that person had been to and started releasing them on their website. So it became a bit of an escalating situation. So it started off with just the locations of interest of Auckland August case on the Ministry of Health's website, with between 15 and 17 sites, mainly in the Coromandel, about where they were going, where they had gone over that long weekend, or over the weekend. Within the next day, it went from 15 to 77 as a couple of more contacts tested positive for COVID. And the data on the Ministry of Health's website grew substantially, very quickly, and it looked like it was going to continue. This is exactly the information that was shown on the Ministry of Health. So there was no way of sorting it, going through it, figuring out details of what you had to go record by record to see if you'd been somewhere. So there's an issue there, and that is consumption. So how can the everyday person go to that website, look through that ever-growing number list, and figure out if they've been in that location? And so it became difficult as more and more sites got added. And one of the things that the data lacked structure, especially early on. The Ministry of Health was changing how they were recording that information. So if you went and looked at it 4 hours ago and then came back to it, it would have changed maybe in the structure that they presented and how they even describe some of the things. So that was another thing that just made it a little bit more difficult, and that didn't make it easy for us either. So one of the things that some of the guys looked internally was grabbing that list, just so that we could actually display that data in a more consumable form. So in our case, mapping it. And that was very similar to other providers. There are a number of other COVID-related locations of interest web maps out there. And at the time, they all relied on doing manual capture of those locations. So a lot of them were quickly out of date as the numbers came flowing through and required manual updates. And so as an admin to one of our systems, I was asked to release a web map to public, which would show all the locations that had been visited. And I thought, well, actually, had a discussion internally and said, can we actually do it better? Instead of just doing once off, can we make it continually update and be able to show the latest locations of interest, not have something that was kind of set out there that was good up until 2 or 3 days ago. And so that was the differentiating factor, was to be able to automate the process. Another step was to be able to show the times, being able to query by time, which wasn't necessarily easy to do at that stage when they didn't have a real structure of how they were showing their dates and times. The other thing was no one was showing the public transport, and there was a lot of it. So in the early stages, there was probably 6 to 8 bus routes that were had come up as locations of interest, and no one was showing them because everybody said, it's kind of too hard to show. So we thought, let's do that. And we don't want to spend, this is just something we're doing pro bono. We want to make it sure that it's not a large amount of work just to keep it up to date. So we had to make it so it was easy to maintain. So the process as it is. So we've got a process that goes away and reads the Ministry of Health website, pulls that data down, and it deciphers whether it's a train or bus or address based on the input information they've given in terms of the location name. So most of the time, if it's a bus or a train, they will say bus or train and then follow it up with some details around what that particular one was. So that helps us map it. For addresses, we're able to pass that off to a geocoder to go and find that address and give us something back in that location. And occasionally we have to do manual interventions when there are poor matches with address. So a great example is a lot of the data that's supplied will say corner of this street and this street. So, well, there's actually kind of 4 addresses on those corners, so it's got to be one of them. So sometimes we have to go in and say which one it is. And but we're notified if that is a poor match. So this system is automatic to a point, and then it will say this is a poor match, and then we have to just manually go in and find that, update it, and then it'll continue on its way. And so everything else is updated automatically. So what we utilize in the space is 3 pieces of kit, basically. FME, or an FME server, which is basically running the process, and that's consuming all the data, whether that be from the Ministry of Health or from Auckland Transport, where we get our bus routes and train details from. And we call the HERE geocoding services using FME. We update the Esri data using FME. We do all sorts of date things using FME. And it also sends emails when required. And those 2 other things that we're utilising in this space are the HERE API for our geocoding services and our Esri Web Maps, which is the place where it's ArcGIS Online, where we're storing the data and also have the web map created. So, as I mentioned before, FME drove the process. It is a reader that allows HTML content to be read from a web page. So any table on a web page can be read, and if there are updates, it can change. Another example, a specific example, is reading the NZX website. You could go away there and read all the share prices and pull that information down using something like the HTML reader. And FME allows a whole bunch of other formats and data types to be read. And in this case, we've got an Esri feature services from Auckland Transport. In this case, we actually had to switch it over to a shapefile eventually because Auckland Transport at some point reduced the number of bus routes that was available via their feature service for obviously their needs, whether those buses weren't running, and so they decided to remove them from their feature service. Probably may have happened, but we had a shapefile of all the bus routes anyway, so we were able to pull that in instead. And again, we utilised the here geocoding, so a call off to a API and then returning back the location, the latitude and longitude of that address, which we're then able to map. FME also allowed us to do all the date calculations. So the product we're using for Esri is ArcGIS Online. It's a worldwide system of software as a service. And it runs under UTC time, not New Zealand time. So we had to calculate our times that Ministry of Health provided us in New Zealand date time back to UTC. So there was a few calculations in there, especially across daylight savings. And also, it provided the matches, the logic that we utilised to match addresses and matches with buses and trains. And it sent poor matches via our email system to a few users. And FME runs that process every 5 minutes, so it's checking for changes and updating our site without any user input. So if you don't know what FME is, it's a graphical programming interface. That's kind of an easy way to say it. And just compartmentalizes lots and lots of little functions and makes it a lot easier to create things very quickly. So down the bottom there currently is just a screenshot of a very simple process in FME, and each one of those little boxes is a simple process running. So FME is used for data integration, and that's where its strength is. It's on the Gartner Magic Quadrants now as a data integration product, and we believe it does a pretty good job of that. So again, it connects, reads and writes multiple formats. So in this scenario, we're only dealing with 3 to 4 formats. In reality, this can read 500 plus formats and write to 500 formats. And again, as I mentioned, it created a process with relative ease. So we could create this process that did all this date handling, emailing, and all this other extra stuff within under a day. So here's actually some examples that are straight out of the script that runs the updates to the locations. And the first one is basically how easy it is to read an HTML table from a website. So basically the top bit is just with input, said that it's reading an HTML table and put in the URL of the Ministry of Health's website, and it just goes away and grabs all the table data and spits that out into the process. And below that is a here geocoding process. It's what's called a custom transformer. It's been built by someone in the community, that allows you just to put in the details, the address, and then it'll go away and return a point with all the details of what the here geocoder has provided. And as you'll see on the right-hand side, there's the time zone calculator. That's actually something we've created internally when we wanted to deal with date times that existed throughout the world. So being able to choose an input date time and an output date time. And in this scenario, we developed it prior to this for another purpose, but in this scenario, it was perfect for being able to switch the New Zealand date time back into UTC before going out to the Esri product. And right at the bottom is just an example of a dynamic description. So the top part of that is basically a couple of hard-coded words saying how many locations that we have mapped and how many on the at what time. So below you can see what it actually turns up on the website as. So if we haven't mapped all the locations because of an issue such as a train record not being able to match properly to a train route, then it will also say that. So it would be all 398 locations, 398 locations have been found out of 399, and we're looking into the 399th one, which is this. So, being able to actually dynamically create these things was quite easy. Why did we choose here as our geocoder? Then there's lots of other geocoders out there. There's Google, Esri, and other ones that are not as relevant, but it was an obvious choice for us. So here, provide a freemium category. So that's actually 250,000 geocodes for free each month. So in the scenario when we just didn't know how many locations of interest we were going to have, that became an easy choice to choose this particular platform to do that for us. And as an example, over the last month, I think we've done a couple of thousand geocodes, even with some complete reruns. So we're not even touching that 250,000 limit. And also we could pass in addresses, get those matches back, and the address doesn't need to be accurate that you provide through to here. It can figure out where things are and put them back to you. And if they were below 100% in terms of their relevance, so here was saying it's not 100% match, then we'd get an email about it. So here's an example of the email that FME would send, explaining to us that the corner of Great South and Wiri Station Road is not 100% match. And depending on that match at street level, we would go in and check that to make sure it is actually turning up in the right space. And at the other end of the process was the web map, which is what everybody sees. The data storage and the web map are using basically the Esri ArcGIS Online platform. There's no coding required, it's just configuration. We utilize the Esri Experience Builder, so just a platform for creating your own web page and map and things. We had tried out a web app builder, which is another one that they have, but we found a couple of issues on what we were trying to do, so we switched to Experience Builder. And the good thing about Experience Builder is we could build for different environments. So whether it's desktop or mobile, the site will adjust, which was very useful. And exactly what it says, it was quick to build. So compared to actually coding a web page and writing it all out yourself, this was very quick to get it up. But ultimately, it lacks refinement. We can't control everything as nicely as we would like, but considering this was a get it out to the public as quickly as possible, it did a good job for that. So creating those web maps is pretty easy. This is it's probably pretty hard to see, but just the interactive display of the creation of that web map. So in this case, it's the mobile view, and that is basically we can add text, change the way the map displays in here specifically for mobile, and then we can switch over to desktop, change it around depending on the resolutions we want to have. We can change the web page on how it's displayed. It's not perfect, but it's a nice, easy platform to get something up and running quickly as an idea of how it works. So what was the outcome? The outcome, the outcome is that the process is run really smoothly, but we've also seen a number of variations occur over the time. So the Ministry of Health has been working away trying to make their data more consumable, and they now have a lot more consistency with the data they're released, so we're not seeing the changes on the web page, but they also have now released data sets like CSV and GeoJSON with all this information. So you don't need to read the HTML page. We've chosen to still read the HTML page because it's because the HTML page actually gets updated before these ones. So it takes up to 2 hours before the CSV and GeoJSON information is updated, whereas the web page is updated all the time. And because we're updating every 5 minutes, we can look at that web page and get the latest. One of the things that is noticeable is a gigantic decline in how people are actually utilising the site. So, and that's not related to the site, it's just related to how the public is obviously feeling about locations of interest. As we've moved on to higher priorities and vaccinations, then there's been a gigantic decline in how many people are actually looking at the locations of interest. And the other thing that is quite, as I mentioned before, the website lacks refinement in terms of being able to be changed little bits and pieces. And that's actually one of the things that lots of people have asked for, just little changes. And with the structure of it is an experience builder sitting in an ArcGIS line, we just can't implement those small changes because we just don't have control over them. So if we were to do some of those things, we would actually have to rebuild the website and do a whole bunch of changes. So it's kind of you kind of go down so far and then you realise that actually to get to another level, to do what everyone else wants, you actually have to go back and rebuild it all in custom. But for our scenario, the experience builder does what it needs to. So we're just going to stick with that in the meantime. The key learnings, basically people gain value out of things that we may perceive as being easy. So, you know, when we built this website, we had no idea that 90,000 people or 90,000 views would occur on that website. It was relatively simple. You know, one of the comments internally is we do stuff that's a lot cooler than this all the time, but this has got gets all the attention. That's really true, but it also shows that something that's easily consumable actually can have a huge amount of benefit. And like I said, the website itself is not perfect. There's bits and pieces in there where you kind of cringe a bit, but it does its job. And it's simple and easy to understand. You know, for my parents-in-law, for my parents, etc., I can pass them that, and they actually know what's going on, and it can see, you know, what to do. It's obvious. And thank you very much. That is the presentation. If you've got any questions, fire them away and I will do my best to answer.